Hello, everyone, and hi, Ollie, and
I
hi, Nathan. We have a special
Hello.
guest, which is my old friend Nathan Naker, who is an amazing astrologer. And Nathan's going to be doing some courses, some modules for our school Plantarium, which I'm not going to talk about today because they're currently being cooked. But at some point, if you're willing, Nathan, I'll have you on again. And you can talk about those courses and what you're doing.
Yeah, brilliant.
Amazing. All right, brilliant. So, but for today, this whole episode was triggered really because couple of months back we had a comment on one of our videos, a very astute but slightly irritated comment about the fact that Ollie and I were always talking about the philosophical basis of the zodiac, like as if it's all northern hemisphere stuff. We were talking about, oh, so Aries is the beginning of spring and Libra is the beginning of autumn and that kind of thing, and obviously this was an Antipodean viewer or listener, and they were like, please remember that some of us are in the southern hemisphere. And so I responded to the comment, just sort of said, yeah, we are aware of that. It just gets a bit tedious repeating every time that the philosophical basis of the tropical zodiac, because it was invented in the northern hemisphere, yada yada. But it did give me the idea to get a special guest on, namely yourself, because there's no one better qualified, in my view, to talk about this. So I mean, just before we get into that, should we have a little bit of a chat about the tropical zodiac versus the sidereal? I'm thinking some of the viewers might be aware of this because many of the viewership are astrologers, our little viewership at the moment, but some of them are herbalists, so they have like no
Mm.
idea about this. So
Oh, right, right,
yeah,
right.
so I mean, I mean, either of you guys go first? Maybe Ollie, if you want to talk a bit
yeah.
about the
So
tropical, and
the
then Nathan,
tropical.
you'll talk about the sidereal, because Nathan, you do
Okay, but
both.
back in the day when well, certainly when the northern hemisphere astrology was being codified, um, the chart was seen to start on 0 degrees Aries, and that's one. And the constellation we called Aries was then at where 0 degrees Aries was, so it filled that gap pretty much. And as all the way around, then you got the constellation Taurus, etc., 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 all the way around back to Pisces. But it's a phenomenon known as the precession of the equinox, which results in a slight wobble of the Earth, that the fixed stars aren't quite as fixed as the ancients thought they were. Well, they probably knew actually, but even though they're called fixed stars, they actually move. And you're going to have to remind me, I think it's like 7 seconds, 70 seconds per year. I can't remember what it is.
Got it written
Some,
down somewhere. It
some
doesn't matter. The
tiny,
point is
some
they move very
tiny
slowly and
amount
gradually.
each year. And so slowly the tropical zodiac, which of course follows the seasons, as we said, in the northern hemisphere, 0 degrees Aries is the beginning of spring, um, slowly got out of sync. And so now when we say the beginning of spring is 0 degrees Aries, that is, I think, two signs on now from when it was
I
invented.
think Nathan would be better qualified to answer this one because by the way, Nathan is a polymath. He does both tropical and sidereal
I'm very
astrology.
nothing.
So
Wow, is
yeah.
that your head exploding as well? Whereabouts is the north degree?
I just
Where's
about am keeping my hair, so
Doing better than
where?
me then. Anyway, so yes. So
Now, tell me,
what
where
do you
is
think?
north? Which in the tropical zodiac? Where is 0 degrees Aries of the in the sidereal zodiac, or vice versa?
at
So
the
I mean,
moment it's about 5 or 6 degrees of sidereal Pisces,
right. So
and
it's gone
we do track, at least in Vedic astrology, we do track the precession of the equinox in the sidereal, and that means
right.
something also. So in terms of the lunar mansions, or sorry, the nakshatras. So it it has an importance there as well. So if I could just share in my screen, because I've put this together in one place. The first place I would recommend anybody to go to is this book, if anybody can see that.
History of the zodiac. And who's
Yes,
that
Who's it
by?
by? Who's the author, Nathan, in that one?
it's by Robert Powell
Thank
with a
you.
double L, and this is actually his doctoral thesis.
Ah,
Okay, and it tracks the history of the zodiac from Babylonian, Mesopotamian times, talks about the tropical, talks about the apogees and epogees and perigees and all of that in terms of the how Ectemon in Greece and all of those people uh, um, tracked and the calendrical zodiac that they used, and how the translation of the calendrical zodiac, which is the tropical zodiac, to astrological purposes happened and why, etc. And his thoughts about it. Obviously, it's his thoughts about it. But at least the facts are there. The facts are there. So that's a very good starting point for anybody who wants to talk about it and know what they're talking about.
So, yes, brilliant. That's always a good
good
start, Nathan. Yes, I mean, does he come down on one side or the other? Does he like end up preferring
he's just,
sidereal?
one important factor that I found in his work is that he's not a worshipper of the Pingri school of thought on these matters. So, which was done in the 60s anyway, with that sort of mindset about cultural exchange from east to west.
So give us the cliff notes. What would you say is the Pingri school thing? What do you mean by that for our non-astrological viewers?
The Pingri school way of thought is that the understanding of the zodiac or astrology went from west to east. And of course, the answer is, from my point of view, as someone who has studied in India astrology, I can say that, there were about at least 10 universities in northern India that were burnt and destroyed through a couple of invasions in the Middle Ages. And so there's no material in the East anymore. The ancient libraries have been destroyed to stand upon. So for the lack of evidence, we cannot draw a conclusion one way or the other. That is the final point.
What's the phrase? Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. I think that's what
exactly.
It comes down to.
Exactly. Yeah. And so a lot of that argument falls upon maybe one or two texts, which are, again, one doesn't prove the whole. But what I would say is that the tropical zodiac did find its way to the east via the Greeks, but they were already using it as a calendrical system, and they already were using a sidereal zodiac very well, and it's still working very well to this day. So it's not like we brought the tropical zodiac and showed you what was wrong. We just brought the tropical zodiac and you were like, okay, we're going to carry on. So it's sort of like that. And the conversation is that both have their purposes and their uses. Yeah. And context is what I find lacking in the understanding of people, in understanding the application of these things, because it requires a nuance. You need to know the tool, what it is used for, where it has come from, and therefore you can make a more informed decision. So in terms of the tropical and the sidereal, for me, it's a non-debate. It's just two different tools for looking at something. Yeah. The systems that have developed around them, those have their different, pluses and
applications
minuses
and uses
and applications. As you know, even in the Western side, it's traditional versus modern. It's like, okay. So, but because the human beings like to have their little soapbox, and this is my thing, and my identity is caught up in this. But the way I practice, I'm not identifying with any one zodiac or the other. My chart is all charts. You are not defined by a sun in one sign. You are defined not just by one chart. You are universal.
Can we pause on that for 1 second? I'm aware that we have not ample time, but that's a really interesting thought, Nathan. Yes. That because I think so many of us, and this is a pop astrology thing, and it's fun sometimes to think I am an Aries or I am a thing. It's fun, it's whatever. But at the end of the day, I always get caught. It's almost like a mental trap, isn't it? Because it's a symbol system describing a set phenomena, and that symbol system is plastic. And as you know, if you've done any horary astrology where you're answering questions, a person can be represented by any of the planets, and it's all context dependent, and it's so mutable. So I think I fall prey to it. I think we all do as humans, because we tend to sort of fall into this mental pigeonhole of thinking of yourself as actually being the symbolism of your chart, and then people start ego identifying with the image of their chart in their mind, and then they get stuck on this being the right thing and the other thing being the wrong thing. And at the end of the day, I don't think that's how divination works. I really don't.
It's
I
very
think
free.
it's a lot more plastic and context dependent than that, which is, I think,
And that's the magic of it, actually. So
Hmm.
if I were to say to you, well, this is what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
We are dealing with, oops, let me just move my face out of the way. There's the constellations themselves, okay?
Yep.
The constellational zodiac. There's the sidereal zodiac, which uses one of the stars in the zodiacal constellations as a reference point.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there are different sidereal zodiacs based on which reference point you are choosing to start it from. And in Vedic astrology, there's a reason why we choose different reference points of stars so we have multiple sidereal zodiacs that we can use. So,
Right.
but that's another topic altogether. And then you come to the tropical. Again, these have been in their conception understood of and derived as seasons.
Yeah.
Because they were calendrical to begin with. And so obviously the question becomes, and they were defined as the start, the peak, and the end of seasons. That is how mutable signs in Western astrology have a meaning of duality and mutability, what is common between one season and the next. So they are common signs as well. So this is what we are, the three primary zodiac principles that we have in astrology with a capital A. And so what I've done is, well, all I've said is, well, it's seasonal. The seasons change in the southern hemisphere. Aries begins in September. And I've just flipped the signs.
Amazing. All right, let's pause there. That's
That's
brilliant. That's brilliant. Thanks, Nathan. So that's fantastic. So just to reiterate in a slightly tedious way for anyone who is new to this, we've got you've described two different sets of sidereal zodiacs that are in use currently based on slightly different criteria. So it's sort of like we're frame shifting already. And of course, I'm sure that there are astrologers, I don't know, you'll have to tell me whether this is true, Nathan, or not, but I'm sure there are astrologers who are staking their flag on one hill or another and saying that this is the correct zodiac and the other one isn't. But it's interesting that you say that there are reasons why one or the other constellational zodiac was used. And then there are astrologers who argue that the so-called tropical zodiac, which is based on the seasons, as you were saying, where 0 Aries is the beginning of spring, the equinox, length of day and night are equal, and 0 Cancer is the beginning of summer, longest day, nights start getting longer from that point on, and so on, that zodiac is the correct one, and that the year should be, and so in the tropical zodiac, all of the so-called, the names of the zodiac signs are really just divisions of the solar year, each given 30 degrees. With the sidereal zodiac, you've actually, the constellations, I'm just addressing this in passing, the constellations, as we know, are not all the same size. But again, with the sidereal zodiac, they are abstracted to 30 degrees. So I think what I'm trying to get to here, and I think hopefully this will segue into your next point, Nathan, is that all zodiacs are abstractions from real world data. They are kind of using real world data, which is somewhat chaotic or not quite symmetrical, and then making it more symmetrical and making it more mathematically exact for the purpose of creating a sort of divinatory lens or symbolic device, if you like.
Can I just jump in very, very quickly here?
Please, Ollie.
I think for Western astrologers, not so much herbalists, when you look at this, you should think about the house systems, of which there are no small number in Western astrology, which are very, very similar idea in that they're based on underlying mathematics, but they can be very, very different from each other. But nobody freaks out too much about that sort of thing. And so,
well, some do.
Well, some do.
The house systems are, one can derive meaning for each house system based upon how it is calculated and derived mathematically.
Exactly. Yes.
What great arc are you splitting? In what way are you projecting? So orthogonal to which great circle? So there's all those hairy questions, but the simple thing is that the constellational zodiac you can see on the left-hand side, the number of days the sun spends in its zodiac is very varied, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that was Marcus was saying, they are unequal divisions of, again, the starry sky. The sidereal zodiac is again a division of the starry sky, but it is more uniform. The tropical zodiac, being seasons, in my view, is terrestrial. It is on Earth
Agreed. Yeah.
because it is seasonal. But so it's that is how people say, oh, I've got Jupiter you know um, in Gemini, but it's in the stars of Taurus. So it's not in Gemini, it's in the season of Gemini on Earth. But
Right.
in the sky of the heavens, it's in the backdrop of Taurus. So the problem is we're using the same names to indicate quite different paradigms. And that is where the conflation and confusion and the standing on the hero and shouting for no reason comes from.
Yeah.
So the point where I'm coming from is that, and again, it goes back to the same philosophy, whether you are coming from the West or the East, that you have descended from the stars through the planetary spheres onto the terrestrial Earth. So there's a paradigm for the sky journey, and there's a paradigm for the earthly journey, and they actually both complement each other. That is my experience in working with them.
Amazing.
So that's the short of it.
Should we move on to the practical application of this, Nathan, now in the last? Because I'm interested. When do you do a natal astrology as well as horary then, medical?
I do everything.
And so, I mean, just on a purely practical, what's the reaction of some of your clients when you say, "Oh, actually, your son isn't really an Aries. Actually, as you were born in like Sydney, you're really equivalent of what would be a Libran."
So the thing about my readings is I don't talk astrology.
Okay, right.
I just talk English. So
Very wise. Yes.
it circumvents the whole jargon and the whole, because that thing that is in that person's head, I am an Aries, is a block
Yes.
between their higher self and the message they need to hear. So
that's a really thank you for that. That's a really cool point. I'm going to take that to the bank.
Definitely,
thank you.
Definitely.
yeah, because it is a block. Both Vedic astrology, people that know Vedic astrology charts, or those that know Western astrology charts, it's a block, right? And then you say I'm introducing another zodiac on top of that. So it's like people lose their mind. So I just talk in English and I get results. And that's what matters. So a client doesn't care how you do the surgery. They just care that you do the surgery well.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, that is the result that speaks more. Now, if you get clients that are aware of the astrology, I'm a Pisces, tell me more about that. Well, then we can talk about it. It's not a problem. It's not a problem because I have to support their sense of identity and empower that in some way. Of course, what I see on my screens will be Pisces in so many different ways, right? You can talk about, well, what they are seeing as that Pisces is connected to these all sorts of things, right, in various paradigms. And so there's a lot to talk about there, which for them, they understand as Pisces. But for you as the specialist, it means it's coming from various roots. So that's why you're a specialist.
Nice. All right. I like that. Just to backtrack a little bit, Nathan. So what started you thinking about this idea that the signs, I mean, obviously you've laid out some of the conceptual underpinnings of it, but what started you thinking practically, like these signs flip in the Southern Hemisphere when you're using the tropical zodiac? Did it come from a theoretical thing, or was there an observation, or was it a mixture of, how did it start for you?
It was a mixture of both. So when I was first studying astrology, Western astrology, traditional astrology, and you speak about the humors and the seasons and things, I had made a PowerPoint slide where I flipped the signs. I flipped the zodiac to the Southern Hemisphere. And I left it there because I was like, I'm not sure, my teacher told me it was made in the Northern Hemisphere, so we all follow that. So I just left it. That was in 2012. 2011, 2012. And then in 2018, 2017, actually, I was in a position where I could go anywhere in the world as a base, right? Because my work is astrology, I can do it anywhere. And so I thought, well, hey, what if I take the data from all my readings I've done and map them geographically as to the amount of success I've had with those clients in those countries, and map that against my astrolocality lines and see what makes sense for me to go as a place to stay where my
Fine.
astrology
Okay.
is thriving.
Okay.
Okay. So what I noticed when I did that was, hang on a moment, consistently in the southern hemisphere, the yes chance in terms of success of when you say something to a client and they say mm-hmm, right, the success chance of that was about less than 60% for the southern hemisphere, but 80%, around 80% in the northern hemisphere. And I said to myself, how can the same techniques and the same way of thinking and the same application of rules have such a discrepancy?
Yeah.
Right.
And I should point
And
out at this point, by the way, folks, that Nathan is an engineer. So you have quite a data-driven mind in some ways. You
very,
like to look at
yeah,
the numbers.
because
Yeah.
after every reading, you do a self-evaluation. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Well, you should do like once a week, right? So you go through all these things, and I've been mapping that out for myself.
Yeah.
So it's very helpful. But so that's where it came from. As that's when it clicked to me, like, oh, let me try that out. That thing that I had done almost, several years ago. Bring it back, and I started looking at charts, and I was actually blown away. And I had an existential crisis with my own chart, as you can imagine.
Okay.
And I
Yes.
didn't do astrology for about 3 weeks. So, but that was the dark night of the soul that you go through as a practitioner when the data is teaching you, when
Yeah.
the astrology is teaching you, and not the other way around, where you're imposing your will on it. And noticed that for the first time, and that's since 2018 when I first put it out there. Never looked back.
Amazing. All right. Yeah, because I've been fascinated by because I've obviously I think I can't remember when we met. I think I met you in 2011 or I can't remember 10.
I think it was 2015.
Okay, so maybe it's 10 years ago. Okay, so I'd met you. So you'd already started sort of thinking about this when I met you, but I didn't know that you'd sort of already really started cooking with this at all by then. But the
Yeah,
first I saw,
2015, not so much. 2018, 2017, end of 2017,
right,
early
because
2018.
the first I saw of it was when you'd popped some, because Nathan runs this fantastic site called Speaker Astrology, which I will be linking below on YouTube and elsewhere. So please check it out. But there was you'd got Speaker Astrology, I think, on Facebook, and me being
Yeah,
basically old now, I have loads of stuff on Facebook, so I kind of like follow loads of stuff on Facebook. So you'd put some of the what you were calling the Southern Tropical charts on there, which are the charts that you'd show you're what I really one of the many things I like about you is that you always show your receipts. You always bring your like here's the same chart in ordinary tropical, and here's the chart in Southern Tropical. And this was a client I saw in South Africa or wherever. This was a horary I did in India, wherever it was. And you were posting them. And I was looking at them, reading the charts, going, yeah, it looks to me like that Southern Tropical chart works better. It clearly says what is, what you interpreted from the chart and turned out to be the correct interpretation, much better than using the unflipped Zodiac
the
in
Northern Tropical.
hemisphere. Yeah. But what really fascinated me, but didn't surprise me really, was the reaction in some of the comments. Like, I'd say some of the people were being like, oh, that's really interesting. And some people were just getting their battle axes out and just like, it was just predictable, but also because I don't know, I don't really have much time for how many angels can dance on the head of a pin type arguments, but I get it. But it was also just like it was really interesting. It was like for some people, I think they felt that you were attacking the fundamentals of their astrology, Whereas I think what you were actually doing was pointing out something really interesting. It's like, look, this frame switching could improve your astrological accuracy.
Dramatically. And it is precisely then that you see astrology groups of people now, the extent that people go to not look at the uncertainty in front of them. You just saw suddenly all of a sudden, the tropical zodiac is being framed as a directional device in space, purely a directional device in space relative to the equator. And I'm like, yeah, but that is the seasons. You can't switch the directionality of the sun from the seasons. They go together.
When you put it like that,
because you're choosing to say directionality, but that's the season.
Yes,
so
yeah,
that shows me the extent to which people were. And then I got questions: what happens at Antarctica? What happens 1 degree south of the equator? And I'm like, well, if we have those charts, I will do them. I've done charts where it's like 2 degrees south of the equator. That's the closest I could find that was good rated, record and things like that. And there's so many arguments about that. I've been doing this. People have said I've done this for 40 years. I can't be wrong with. I don't know. Have you checked your charts? Have you gone back to evaluate them?
It's the same with the houses, isn't it?
Because
but can you use
exactly
with
with the
sort
houses.
Of thing? It's kind of
exactly. And I change my house system every month because power divination, right? So
a quick question. I'm just thinking about your philosophy of what you said, which is fascinating. I'm assuming, and I'm afraid my astronomy is very bad here, that the sidereal star map is the same in the south. If you're in Sydney, are you basically getting the same sidereal stars as you would in London, sort of thing? So what basically we're saying, the cosmic soul realm is universal, but the earth realm is dependent on where you're standing, sort of thing.
It's dual, right? And that's what Robert Zoller was saying. He taught, he was one of my teachers. He taught that the sidereal is the masculine zodiac, and he taught that the tropical is the feminine zodiac.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
I'm going the next step and saying the feminine is necessarily dual. Okay. So it is, from a philosophical point of view, and they have a conversation with each other, right? So the one is the fixed. It is the masculine energy. It is the outline of the circle, which has to be hard and defined, right? So that everything below it can play and dance, and that is the joy of the feminine. So in that paradigm, when I look at a chart, you look at tropical chart, you look at the sidereal chart, in a way you're seeing the masculine and feminine conversation. Someone can have a sidereal Pisces Jupiter, okay? But they can be in the tropical, in the northern hemisphere, it will be in Aries, spring energy, Aries season energy behind that, or manifesting that sidereal Jupiter in Pisces, which is quite forceful in shoving down knowledge down your throat, okay? Or it can be a Libran energy in the environment of nature on Earth that is manifesting that same Jupiter and Pisces sidereal background, which is more conversation.
That's fascinating, Nathan. And I do, the more I think about it, the more I like your point, Ollie, about this being very analogous to the houses and the arguments about the houses, like in recent years, the whole sign versus quadrant debate, which I find endlessly fascinating and
amusing. That's still going on.
Equal measure. Of course it is. But I mean, less so now. It's less, people are less incendiary about it. But I mean, it's interesting because I just think so much of divination is about frame switching. And, as much as I do, one of the arguments that I think I would have, though, and I think this is just to clarify, what we're not saying is just bung anything in. Like, it's not about sticking anything in the blender. It's about learn a system and learn it thoroughly and properly. And then when you understand how that system works, what all its elements are, and what the philosophical underpinnings of that system are, then you can start to experiment and extemporize. I would emphasize that Nathan has studied thoroughly both Western traditional astrology, Western psychological astrology, and Jyotish astrology. And so you can start to once you've studied those for many years, you can start to experiment a bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
A case in point, if I may just say, a case in point on that point was there was an adventurer, is sort of seafaring adventurer person from New Zealand, and obviously the chart is from the southern hemisphere. And however, the northern tropical zodiac puts them as a sun in Libra ascendant, right?
Oh, yes.
Sun in Libra ascendant, you see? But they're an explorer. They have gone where no one has gone before. They have spent a lot of time alone at sea on a little yacht, right? Months after months after months, right? They have a bushy beard and their face is like a pink flush.
Right.
Okay.
They're
So
burnt red in
right.
the
So
face, basically.
yes, and they're okay with being in emergency situations out at sea alone. And I said to myself, this is clearly an Aries sun in the ascendant.
Yes.
Okay. That has the fifth house ruler in the ascendant. They are self-driven. They are okay doing things on their own, to the point, to the extent that, I mean, the archetype of the adventurer, the explorer, the pioneer is what people say is Aries,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
have a very prominent astrologer who was an opponent advocate say to me, oh, but he's known for being a very pleasant person,
Okay.
and therefore Libra sun in the ascendant is justified.
That
And I said to him, my quick retort was, he doesn't have his own Wikipedia page because he's a nice person.
well, firstly, I
Right?
think you won that rhetorical that repartee match. But secondly, I think there's a little point here. But we'll make the little point and then we'll break, because there's going to be a part two. This is the end of part one. Part two, Nathan's going to be coming back with some chart examples, and we're going to talk more about the specifics of how the Southern Tropical actually works for any of you guys who are studying astrology who want to experiment with this, because we encourage you to do that. But just before we do that, just I think you're talking about the Explorer chart with the Sun in Aries and your comeback. I wanted to make the small point there that I think for anyone who studied traditional astrology, like horary or just any form of traditional astrology, we are more used to switching between a psychological interpretation and then a very practical interpretation. What does this physically describe? What are the attributes of this thing? That I'm not saying that modern astrologers don't, or 20th century psychological astrologers don't do that. They do to some extent, but it's much more common in traditional astrology to go, the ascendant ruler is this planet in this sign. It looks like this kind of person doing this kind of thing, or it's like the fourth house ruler is in its detriment and it's Mars in the day chart. It's like, okay, you live in a burnt out ruin of a house, or something like that. So I think, whereas I think for some astrologers who are more familiar perhaps with only the psychological, they can tend to foreground the subjective at the expense of the descriptive sometimes. And that can make it harder sometimes, I think, to see where a chart is more or less accurately descriptive, potentially.
Absolutely.
100%. That is where sorry, go ahead, Ollie.
No, I was just saying, and I've won, I know a couple of dear friends who are Australians. I should be rushing back to their charts and recalculating them.
It was marvelous. I got to see my friends in a totally new light and understand them, And coming back to Marcus's point, yes, the traditional astrology gives you the rigor of analysis so that you can do meaningful comparison and contrasting.
Yes,
So
sure.
that's the important. That's the important.
Absolutely. And I don't think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of us would say that psychological astrology is rubbish or bad. It's definitely
very useful.
Yeah. But it's just this frame switching thing. Anyway, right, we'll end this one here. But so we'll say bye, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.